So Sudhir, talking about user behavior analytics, of course, a lot of push is being done from in UBA because of the current times. What is your take on it? What is the future of UBA?
Oh, we do need to do that. We do need to do that a lot more than what we are doing today. And organizations, I feel, are moving in the right direction. So UBA or UEBA, it's sometimes user and entity behavior analysis. Yeah. So let's take an example. See, you have somebody who comes into office at, let's say, 9 o'clock, logs into their system, goes to the canteen, has a cup of coffee, comes back, works till about 11 o'clock, takes a break, again breaks for lunch, and so on. So you have a set of user behavior that is defined, correct? Now, suddenly, if you find that this person is logging into, now this happens virtually also. So, people log in the morning at some time, whatever is convenient to them. They work, they take breaks and stuff like that. And you know that this person is now at their hometown in Bangalore or Chennai. So they are logging in from there. We have the IPs, so we can figure that out. Suddenly you find that the same person is logging in from, let's say, North Korea at 11 p.m. in the night. Right? It's the same person, it's the same username, the same ID. Normally what would happen is the system would just say that yes, it's a username and password, and probably even multi-factor authentication. They've somehow got hold of the OTP. What we need to analyze is this baseline behavior. So what you do in UBA is first you set a baseline behavior, and then you match the behavior against the baseline behavior. Is this standard? So that, yes, that is not happening a lot, but yes, and a critical event like this, suddenly logging in from somewhere else at a weird time, will get highlighted. But is the same user logging in, for example, if the user is logged in from one PC with a single IP address, and suddenly the IP address changes from Chennai to Chhattisgarh, somewhere. So those are the things that should actually raise issues. Right. So that is user and entity behavior. This is not just for users, it's also for entities. So for example, a certain printer is printing, let's say, an average of 20 pages a day or something like that, and suddenly it starts printing 200 pages or something like that. So there was this attack that happened in this Bangladesh bank where they had to print something, and the reason that they realized that the bank was attacked was because the printer started printing too much. So it's user entity behavior analysis. When you look at it, what you are getting is some data which says that this is not a standard pattern of behavior. Right? And then you put your artificial intelligence, then you put all your other analytics behind it and say, why is this happening? Is it the same user? Is it that the user has suddenly changed from their Wi-Fi to mobile dongle and then it's coming from somewhere else? Possible.
True.
Right? So that's...
So do you think UBA is only meant for that, or is there another side to it? Is there any other learning that can be taken from a user perspective?
From a user perspective, UBA can help, but I think it's limited. I personally don't think... user behavior is more used to a security analyst than... So for example, if I am an individual, right? And if, let's say, the CID is for some reason keeping a watch on me, and if I have a steady pattern, if I break a pattern, that is where their alarm bells start ringing, right? The alerts start coming up. So that is what... So for me personally, if I'm an attacker masquerading as one of the users, then yes, it starts making sense. I need to follow the patterns. But then that's too deep. It's like, if a attacker has come into your system, they're just going to do whatever the maximum damage in the minimum time and get out. There are attackers who stay in systems for many years.
Wow.
And just keep stealing data. But that they do mostly for the government systems and stuff like that. I mean, the US government was subject to that kind of an attack.
True.
Just, I think, in December or something like that. So they had a backdoor through a software which almost everybody used. Very, very dangerous thing. They're still trying to figure out what is the total loss that has happened over some years because of this particular attack.
True. Absolutely. They're going to take some time for that.
Yeah.
How big do you think UBA will become in the years to come?
See, it has its place. It cannot... if you look at UBA by itself, it's one of the tools that you use. Right? Like that, there are many other tools. There are multiple tools. It needs to be used. You can add a aspect of machine learning to it. You can automate it to find out, because a person looking at it can only look at a few things. A software looking at it can look at a lot more.
A lot more, true.
So yeah, it would definitely be
true.
a part
growing
of this
phenomenon.
Yeah, before UBA we had something called Security and Information Event Monitoring, SIEM. That was also very. What it did was. Every company has some security devices. One of them is called a firewall. You could have some other security devices also. So what that used to do is it used to check any kind of anomalous behavior in the firewall, in the system. So anything that you do, a log is generated. So if you log in to with your username and ID, a log is generated. If you do something, a log is generated. If you send an email, there's a system log for that. So SIEM used to analyze a lot of those logs. But that is like you had to set the rules. You had to say, look for this kind of behavior, which may be predictable, may not be predictable. With machine learning, what you can do is look at all the behavior and you find out and you tell me if you find this anomalous or
Correct.
it's normal behavior.
Correct. True. Now, privilege access management is something that almost goes hand in hand with UBA.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
How critical is it to employ PAM solutions
Extremely
for an organization?
critical. Extremely critical because it's all about privileged access, or some people call it privileged identity management, PAM or PIM. It's all about who has access to what. And by who, I don't mean a person. Yes, it is person dependent also, but also a position. So for example, in an organization, the CFO would have access to almost all the financial data, right? One level or two levels below the CEO also would probably have access to most of the financial data, right? But a person at an accountant level may not need access. In fact, it's a sin to give access to the everything, correct? So you need to define that at this level, a person has access to A, B, and C. A slightly higher level, you have access to more. The issue that I see in PAM is if I have access to a certain level and I need access one level higher, I can get an approval. There is a process usually.
Right.
I can get an approval and I can get it approved from my boss or the security head, and I can get access. Now, I have seen examples where all requests are approved.
Okay.
Right? That is a governance failure in my opinion, where you need to have that governance saying that if somebody is asking for access, what is the reason? What are they going to use the access? Can we limit the access for, let's say, 30 days or a week or something like that, and then it reverts back? Then you come back and say that, no, I need more access, more time to access this information. What are they using that information for? I mean, are they just downloading it on an USB and just carrying it home? That's also very difficult, right? Very dangerous. So the governance part, I feel, is where PAM is not as effective as it could be. Because if you are going to approve everything, why even have a PAM?
Correct. Now, there are a host of IT standards such as PCI DSS, HIPAA, ISO 27001 and regulations of GDPR, among other local regulations are also there, which are mandated by the governments, and central banks explicitly ask for role and rule-based access, multi-factor authentication that you spoke of earlier,
absolutely.
Password vaulting. Why is so much weightage given on PAM by these standards?
So what these standards do is they set the guidelines for what are the best practices. Any kind of standards. So let's take ISO 27001, for example. It sets the standard that if you talk about IT, and IT security is also a part of IT, what is an organization with some of the best practices, what do they follow, or what practices do they follow, right? So that's how standards are built. And they evaluate you against those standards, against those guidelines, and see where you fall on the scale, right? So if you match everything, you are the highest. If you are missing out a couple of points, you are one level lower, and so on. That's what happens. The reason why they give a lot of importance to PAM in these standards, again, is because we are talking about two or three critical things. One is we are talking about data, and we are talking about user data, customer data, especially when it comes to GDPR and some of the others. We're talking about data privacy. So how do you protect data privacy? Who in the organization has access to the specific data or the private data of an individual or of a group, right? You can have data being presented in multiple ways. For example, I could be represented as an Indian middle-aged male, and that's it. Nobody needs to know anything further. But then you could also have my name. You could also have my date of birth, my phone number. So that gets into more and more levels of data. It's more critical levels of data. So standards, what they define is they say that who has access to this data, who has access to this information, and on what basis is that defined. That's why they take PAM very seriously. So if you have PAM and if you have implemented it well, you usually score higher in these kind of evaluations.
True. Now, of course, these standards will continue to be there, and I think more will come in due time. Talking about single sign-on, right? Of course, companies have so many applications, and it's very difficult for you to log into each one of them. What do you think is the importance of single sign-on, and where do you see how the future of single sign-on?
So it will continue and it will evolve. It has been evolving slowly. There's nothing revolutionary that has happened in the last few years in single sign-on. The way, the approaches in which people sign on may have changed. So, for example, multi-factor authentication now for a single sign-on is a very critical point. Right? That was not the case when we were working from offices. Now that we are working, whether we are working from offices, if we use a VPN, we need to get a multi-factor authentication. So single sign-on will be there because companies want to make it convenient. But the SSO providers, the application providers will need to build the security within their systems so that when somebody evaluates you as a single sign-on provider, they look at what security do you provide. We also talked about this example where you could get kicked out of a system or logged out of a system automatically after 10 minutes if you're not active. For example, you have a window open of the SAP system and you are working on an email. If you don't go to that window within 10 minutes and do something, you get kicked out. So you need to log back in again. Again, the single sign-on system works and it's very good, very convenient, but it needs to be implemented properly. It's going to be important and it will evolve. It will have its own evolution going forward. What is it? I don't know. I mean, we could look at multiple scenarios of how single sign-on will work. Is it going to be that? Is it going to be like Apple? For example, if I log into my MacBook, I am automatically logged into my iPad and iPhone and everything as the ecosystem. As an organization, if I was looking at single sign-on, I probably would not do that because it's good for the end customer, but it's probably not a good idea to do it. But if you can do it very seamlessly with the right kind of security, maybe that could be the future.
Right. In fact, that makes me ask you another question is, there's so much of security, and with people working online, is just security. Do you think the security products are losing the human side to it? Do you think
I feel security products, by the very nature of what they do, which is police and they don't have a human side. I don't think they have a human side. But if there was a human side, and by nature that's how they're supposed to be. Security is supposed to look over your shoulder and see that whether what you're doing is correct or no. If you have somebody looking over your shoulder and patting your shoulder, that human side will be. So security is always going to say that you're doing this wrong. Sure. Security is not going to come back and say, no, great, you did this right. That's what the other people and HR are there for.
Sure. So it's like having a virtual cop all the time.
It is a virtual cop. It is a virtual cop. And it's like I said, it's a balance between how much you want convenience to be given to the user and how much security you want. If you talk to a security professional, they'll say security all the way. If you talk to managers, if you talk to HR, they'll say no, let's have a balance.
Yeah, they'll want some level of convenience and ease of work.
They will.
Absolutely. Well, Sudhir, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on privilege access management, single sign-on, and so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.